be a pilot growing up, and I became a lawyer instead, so go figure. But it always fascinated me to be able to be in the air and fly with the birds, and I always thought it'd be a fascinating thing to be a pilot. And so it got me to thinking about this week's message to you this morning. And peppered in with it is some of the circumstances associated, obviously, with Houston and Louisiana and Tennessee and other areas that have been so severely impacted by the hurricane. But I want you to kind of join with me on my journey into this idea of a pilot, because the really underlying question to all of you is, who is your pilot? If you're walking onto a commercial aircraft and you're flying from, let's say, here to Houston to help them out, you probably don't know the pilot. You trust that the pilot knows what they're doing. You trust that the co-pilot also knows what they're doing, but you really don't know the pilot. But in this life, as Christians and as children of God, we do know the pilot, or do we? And so that's the question being posed for you today. I've taken the text of the message from Psalm chapter 93, verses 4 and 5. Again, kind of a tip of the hat to those that are suffering in Houston, but it fits in very well with my message today. Psalm 93, verses 4 and 5. The floods have risen up, O Lord. The floods have roared like thunder. The floods have lifted their pounding waves. But mightier than the violent raging of the seas, mightier than the breakers on the shore, the Lord above is mightier than these. And as I kind of prefaced the lesson, when I was a teenager, I had this passion of wanting to be a pilot, and so I had the good fortune of being able to join my dad on his company's corporate jet bound for Corcoran, California, which is up in the San Joaquin Valley. And at the time, my dad was in-house corporate counsel for a company that both grew and milled cotton throughout the entire San Joaquin Valley. And to this day, actually, the company remains this nation's largest exporter of cotton throughout the world. In fact, at one point in time, they said that this company grew enough cotton to make 840,000 pairs of boxer shorts every year. So they grew a lot of cotton. But on this particular day, I wasn't just the passenger on the corporate jet. I actually was the co-pilot, because I was seated right next to Dick Gillespie. And Dick was the company's longtime, full-time pilot. And he was standing there at the cockpit entrance, greeting all the corporate executives, everyone that walked on board, and all the people with whom I had really the privilege to fly that day. And Dick looks at me and says, "Well, welcome aboard, Randy." And I looked up, and there was Mr. Gillespie. Now, I will tell you, in my teenage mind, he was like the Methuselah of the airways. He was not a young man. He was a decorated World War II pilot. He had flown thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of hours, both in the military and commercially and privately. He was an old man, but he was really a good pilot. And the reason why I knew that Dick was a good pilot was because my dad told me so, because my dad flew a lot in terms of his career and would tell me stories about Dick Gillespie and what a good guy he was. And he would always say, you know, Dick is just a great pilot. And so Mr. Gillespie and I chatted for a few minutes, and then I went to sit in my seat with this sense of assurance, because here I am on this corporate jet sitting in the co-pilot seat next to the vaunted Dick Gillespie. And I'm thinking to myself, well, what more could you ask if you're flying, right? You're seated right next to the pilot, right, Heidi? The pilot's experienced, he's proven, and I'm seated right next to Dick Gillespie. I'm in really good hands, I'm thinking. And that knowledge came in handy about 30 minutes later, because as we're flying to Corcoran, we fly into this wall of winds that was just absolutely crazy in terms of gaining altitude and losing altitude. I mean, the executives were kind of gasping in the back. You could hear the dentures rattling. And Dick told us to check our seats and to check our rosary beads all at the same time. I've probably had smoother roller coaster rides than that flight to Corcoran. But unlike the other passengers, I think, and maybe this is in my teenage mind, but I thought I stayed relatively calm. I mean, I didn't really have a death wish, but I did have an advantage, I think, over the other executives in the back, because I knew the pilot. I knew Dick Gillespie, and I was seated right next to him. I knew his heart, and I trusted in his skill, and I'm thinking, Dick can handle this. The storm was bad, but, in this case, the pilot was even better because he was that good. And as much as a teenaged pilot could relax, I did. And I use that as a preface for the fact that for all of us, at any given time, it can be an extremely stormy world. Every day brings turbulence into our lives. We might have a moody economy. We have aging bodies. We have a declining job market. We have increasing street violence. We have natural disasters. The question then during these really troubling times is, do we have a good pilot? And the resounding response of the Bible is absolutely we do. Yes, with an exclamation point. For instance, Psalm chapter 25, verse 7 says, "You are good, Lord." Psalm chapter 25, verse 8 says, "Good and upright is the Lord." Psalm 86, verse 5, "You, Lord, are forgiving and good." You see, God is good. He's good in skill, and He's good in heart. And I believe that a lot of us suffer from small thoughts about our God. Last week we talked about calling God our daddy, our papa, our Abba. And in the context of that message, I wasn't minimizing God's immensity and that we should have a healthy fear, not an afraidness of God, but a reverence for Him. But I think sometimes in trying to develop this relationship, we lose sight of the fact that God is an immense God. Because in an effort sometimes to attempt to see Him as our friend, we've lost sense of that immensity. And in our desire to try and really understand this God whom we are worshiping, we've sought to, as best we can, try and contain Him, put Him in a box, define Him, write out His characteristics, be able to put it in our hands so that we can look at it and observe it, take notes about it, write questions. But the God of the Bible can't be contained. He brought order out of chaos. I mean, God created creation, right? With a word, He called Adam out of the dust. And then He called Eve out of a bone. He didn't consult with a committee. He didn't seek independent counsel. And in fact, in Isaiah chapter 46, verse 9, it says, "I am God, and there is no other. I am God, and there is none like me." You see, Alexander the Great, as masterful and as a genius of war as he was, he's just a mound of dust in a tomb. And even today, the Queen of England, she's called Her Majesty, but Her Majesty still needs to eat and bathe and rest. The true majesty, on the other hand, is never hungry. God never sleeps. He's never needed attention or assistance. And from the very tiniest of microbes to the mightiest of mountains, the Hebrew writer says in chapter 1, verse 3, He sustains everything by the mighty power of his command. He has authority over the entire world and universe. And most importantly, he has absolute authority over your world, too. He has authority over your sleep patterns. He has authority over your eating habits. He has his authority over your salary, the traffic of your commute, the arthritis in your joints. I mean, God reigns over all of that. He's never surprised, and he has never, ever uttered the phrase, wow, how'd that happen? I mean, God's not done that. God's power is unsurpassed, and his heart is completely unblemished. In James chapter 1, verse 17, Jesus' half-brother, James, says, there's nothing deceitful in God, nothing two-faced, nothing fickle. In other words, with God, there's no hidden agenda, there's no selfish motive. He loves with a good love and forgives with a good forgiveness. Good, as Merriam-Webster would define good, as in beautiful, best, and bountiful. God's goodness is this major blaring headline throughout the entirety of the Bible. No matter which page you might look at and to which page you might turn, the headline is consistently that God is good and that God is in control. And that's important, because if God were only mighty, well, we would salute him, right? But since he's merciful and mighty, then we have the privilege of being able to approach him. No wonder the psalmist said, as I heard Debbie say to Heidi this morning, taste and see that the Lord is good. Psalm chapter 90 or 34, verse 8. A glimpse of God's goodness, I think, really changes everything for us. God's unrivaled goodness undergirds everything else we can say about prayer, which is what we've been talking about now for this a third week. And here's why. Because if God is like us, but he's only slightly stronger than us, then why would you pray? I mean, if he grows weary, then why would you even bother? If he has limitations or questions or hesitations, then you might as well be praying to the Wizard of Oz. Really. However, if God is at once the Father and the Creator and is wholly unlike us and high above us, then we, at any point, are only a prayer away from help. I'll tell you a little story about me. When I was in my mid-20s, I purchased a 1968 MGB from a friend of mine. Now, that wasn't brand new. I'm not that old. This was a restored MGB that a really good friend of mine had had a passion about restoring. And he did this with a lot of different cars, and I just happened to like this one. Now, I will tell you it's not very practical for a young family, as I was in my mid-20s, to have an MGB, but it beat the rug out of the truck that I had before then. So this MGB replaced my truck, and it was a really cool car. It looked a lot like this, actually. It was candy apple red and had a black tonneau cover. It had actual chrome spoke rims and wheels. It had this 2-carburetor system to pump this 4-cylinder beast of an English engine in this MGB. I mean, you weren't going to set any land speed records with it, but you know what? It was so fun to take that top off and cruise around with the kids and my wife and just drive around town. I remember one time we actually threw the surfboard in the back and drove out to the beach. I mean, it beat driving a Woody, right? So this was really a very cool car for me. And I remember my friend, when we had made the exchange, handing me the keys. Now, you have to understand my friend. He can be very frank, but he's very honest and he's very truthful with me. And he said, okay, now, Randy, you have to keep gas in the tank. Yes, I know that. You have to keep gas in the tank. Randy, you need to keep air in the tires. Yes, I know. You need to keep air in the tires. Now, can you change the oil? Of course I can, I lied. I couldn't change the oil. Because the truth be told, I did not know the difference between a manifold and a windshield wiper. I just didn't. And this is an English car, and everything is backwards anyway. It was such a confusing vehicle. It was fun to drive when it operated well, but it was a beast to try and repair. So I didn't have the first clue about how to change the oil, but I was so enamored with this car, and he's handing me the keys. I can put gas in it. I can put air in the tires and change the oil. Yeah, I'll deal with that later. Of course I can. But I lied. My friend, on the other hand, was a professional. And he made a hobby out of restoring cars like this. And he worked on cars like Monet would paint with watercolors. He was just magical about what he could do with these old beaters and restore them. And he tried to teach me a lot of stuff about the car, and I tried to learn a lot of stuff about the car, but my mind was like a Teflon pan. It just slid off everything that he said. Nothing stuck, basically, except for putting gas in the gas tank and air in the tires. That I can do. But I wasn't about to tell my friend that I wasn't really absorbing all this additional information he was trying to provide me. And as life would have it, my ineptitude surfaced on one Saturday morning. My friend had reminded me, again, that it was probably time to change the oil in my MGB. And he volunteered to come over and help me. Do you know how to do it? Yes, I answered. You want me to help you? I should have said yes. No, I can do it. And I spent an hour underneath that car, just first of all trying to locate the oil pan. And I spent the next hour, having located the oil pan, trying to find and then remove the oil plug. I finally removed it. I drained the oil. I put, whatever was required, 5, 6 quarts of brand new oil now in my MGB. And I'm thinking, man, I did it. I got it finished. It may have taken me a while, but you know what? I got it done. Or so I thought. Because apparently during my little misadventure on the oil change, and perhaps sensing that I was maybe just a little mechanically challenged, my friend decided to drive over to my house and at least observe, if not help me. So I get out from underneath the car, and there he is standing, like this, with this Cheshire grin on his face, and says, "So, all done?" "Yep, I'm all done. I've got it." And he said, "Are you sure?" I said, "Of course I'm sure." "Then what's that?" And he's pointing to 5 quarts of engine oil that are pouring out of the oil pan onto the asphalt because I had forgotten to put in the plug. "We need to talk," he said. So my friend then walks me over to his truck. He opens the side panel of his truck, and he shows me tray upon tray upon tray of tools. And then he begins to describe the purpose of each of these tools. He says, I use this one to remove the oil filters. I use this one to tighten the clamps. I use this one to attach the hoses. This one to... And he took me tool by tool by tool through each and every tray in his truck. And after what seemed to be an hour of show and tell, he closed the cabinet, locked it, and then looked me straight in the eye. And this is what he said: "Randy, I fix and I restore things. I do this as a hobby. And what might be really, really hard for you is really very simple and easy for me. I may not be good at everything, but I am good with cars. So next time, why don't you let me help you? Cars are my passion. And besides, Randy, you're my friend. And I will tell you, church, I never spilled another drop of oil in that MGB again. And I use that story for this purpose, because here's what I think. Sometimes in life, our toughest challenges are simple oil changes to God. And here's what else I think. A lot of us make really big, unnecessary messes in our life. But we can change that. And here's how. Picture, it's Monday morning. Not this coming Monday morning, because for most of you it's a holiday. So let's talk about next Monday morning. It's Monday morning, the alarm clock lives up to its name, and you hear this clanging noise. I don't know what alarm you have set. Just think of the old-fashioned one that has this little hammer that goes between the two bells. That's really old school, I know, but it's really annoying. And that's the alarm sound that I have set on my phone because I need something annoying to wake me up. And let's just say you groan, it's whatever time you have the alarm set for. You sit up on your bed, and you just try and kind of get yourself prepared for the day. Now, ordinarily, what you would do is you'd get up, you'd make the coffee, you turn on the news, and you begin your daily briefing on the toxic problems in our world. I don't know about you, but you cannot turn on the news channel and expect a bunch of kumbaya moments. It just doesn't happen on the news. They tell you the worst in the most bleakest senses because each and every news station wants to kind of trump the other, so to speak, and have the best report or the closest report or the most current report or the most salacious report. It depends on what news channel you watch. But none of them are going to, as a matter of course, broadcast happiness for you. I watch KUSI typically, and as a relief valve, they'll go to, let's adopt a pet. And so they bring out these cute little dogs and cats, and it's all great. And those are really heart-rendering moments. And then they flash back to Hurricane Harvey in Houston. I mean, here I'm ready to adopt a dog, and now I'm looking at people who are trying to make sense of their lives. And ordinarily, that's what we do. We get up, we drink a cup of coffee, we watch the news, and it's just toxic-filled. But I want you tomorrow, or since it's a holiday, the next Monday, I want you to turn to prayer, a simple prayer. Not complicated. We talked about that several weeks ago. I want you, when you're just still half asleep, you take your coffee, and instead of lumbering over to the television, lumber over toward your chair and take a seat. Now, I will grant you, if you're anything like me, you don't look like much, right? You just got out of bed. Your face has creases from the pillow all over it, and your hair's all smashed. But you know what? It doesn't matter, because you haven't come to look at you, right? Right? You've come to be in prayer with God. He doesn't care what you look like. You've come to look at God. And then here's what I want you to do. Just an example. Because we've been talking about this now over Father, Abba, Papa, Daddy. That's it. Because the words are going to come slowly at first because you just woke up. But instead of watching toxicity on TV, you're talking to the creator of the universe. And granted, your mind may not be as clear as possible, but at least you start the conversation and engage in just addressing who God is. Your Father, your Abba, your Papa, your Daddy. and you stick with it. You get past that. And maybe you say something really simple. God, you are so good to me. Your heart is good. Your ways are right. And as you start uttering these words, something kind of stirs within you. Something starts to kind of wake up. And then maybe you continue in your prayer. You know what, God? The weather's pretty bad. It's stinking hot here. It's humid. We're not used to this. The economy is bad. I've lost my job. But God, you're just awesome. And I don't want you to underestimate for a moment, church, the power of that moment. Because how long did that take? 10 seconds maybe? You just opened the door to God and welcomed truth to enter your heart. Faith snuck in while despair was dozing off. And who knows, you might even start to worship right there in your chair. Morning breath and everything. Because God doesn't care what you look like. He doesn't even care how you smell, for that matter. He's a lot more interested in your heart. So, is your world going to just change miraculously because you prayed? In one sense, I'll just be candid with you. No, it's not. Just because you prayed doesn't change the world. There are still wars going on. The traffic is still clogging your commute. Heartbreakers and natural disasters are still wandering the planet. But you are different because you have this sense of peace, this connectedness, because you've spent time with the pilot. And the pilot is up to the task. Mr. Gillespie, as it turns out, got us through the storm that day just fine. People collected themselves and their dentures and their rosary beads, and we made it to Corcoran. He landed the plane and stood in the cockpit door as we exited the flight. And I tell him, got a little choppy there, Mr. Gillespie. You know how a teenager can be, kind of cocksure, you're bulletproof, you know everything. Well, that was me. Got a little choppy there, Mr. Gillespie, I said as I was leaving my co-pilot seat, which, by the way, after we had flown through the turbulence, he actually let me pilot that aircraft. That must have been a scary thing for everybody involved, but fortunately I had the pilot sitting next to me, so I didn't crash us or anything like that. I mean, I wasn't taking off or landing the plane. It's just like we had leveled off to whatever our altitude is, and I'm flying, and I probably flew for, a couple hundred miles, but in a Learjet, it goes like that, so it was pretty quick, but it was fun. So anyways, I'm cocksure of myself. I tell Mr. Gillespie, oh, a little choppy out there, huh, Dick? Yeah, he agreed. And then he told me that I could call him Dick. That's why I just said I called him Dick. Then he says, were you scared, Randy? I said, no, being a teenager, not really. Everything changes when you know the pilot. And better yet, I was sitting right there next to him, and now I have the privilege of calling him by name. So, church, who's your pilot? What's his name? Can he fly you out of stormy circumstances? Can he get you through the trials and travails of life? Can he save families in Houston? Can he rescue a family in Escondido? Can he take a family that doesn't have a job who's looking for a job and find him a job? Can he provide a meal to someone in need? Can he provide some clothing to another family who's also in need? Yes, he can. And you know how God does that? Through you. You see, when we commune with our Lord, and when we try and understand who our pilot is, he knows the course where we're going, and he knows the destination. And we then provide the elements by which we can get there. Because a family that's in need of a meal isn't going to have a meal just spring up out of the middle of their floor. A family who may be in need of some clothes aren't going to open their closet and boom, they have a rack full of clothes. That can happen, but it happens through us. We provide that meal. We provide those clothes. We provide those resources or contacts or money or whatever so that God's will can be done in these people's lives so that they can know the pilot too. You know, people on airplanes and commercial aircraft, I used to call them stewardesses. That's very un-PC these days. I can't say stewardess because it may be a steward, right? So now what are they called? Flight attendants, thank you. So I want to be very PC this morning. So, you know, commercial aircraft have flight attendants. And these flight attendants have been trained in a lot of different things, especially how to operate a safety belt. Have you noticed that? You take one in and you insert it into the other. It's like, why are we going through this drill? I mean, it was like in the 60s, but they still do it. But these flight attendants have been trained in a lot of emergency stuff too. If something happens on a plane and you need to deplane quickly, the flight attendants have been trained to know exactly how to get you off the plane to safety. And in this plane of life that we're traveling in, with God as our pilot, you as flight attendants have responsibility for the safety of the people that you know on your flight. And you're on a different flight than I am. We all are going to different places at different times. But if you, as the flight attendant on your craft, with the people in your plane, maybe that's your family, maybe that's your coworkers, maybe that's your neighbors, but you've been trained in certain safety courses to know how to rescue them from danger. Well, the first thing that you can tell them as we begin the journey is, for your safety, here's what you need to do. You need to know how to buckle your seatbelt. You need to know that when that oxygen mask drops out of the ceiling, please take care of yourself first, then deal with your children. You know, I mean, you hear that all the time. And then there's the lights, and then they point to the exits. I mean, they do this really fancy thing. Southwest has made an art form out of doing this. I mean, it's just hilarious on some of these YouTubes. But the point that I'm trying to make is this. On the plane that you're flying, with the passengers that you know, you have some information that they need, especially in times of need. And if Harvey is any example of that, the people in Texas have coalesced in a way that really gives all of us a great deal of encouragement. That this is the way human beings relate. We don't have helicopters, and we don't have boats, and we don't have those swamp things cruising out of Louisiana, and we don't have any kind of rescue apparatus that checks first for political affiliation or color of skin. There are people in need of rescue, and they are there to help them. No questions asked. And church, that's you. There are people in our lives that are in need of rescuing. And it doesn't matter their color. It doesn't matter their political affiliation. It doesn't matter their education. It doesn't matter their social income. None of that matters. Because at the end of the day, we are on the same aircraft with one pilot for a final destination. And what we want is people in our aircraft to join us on that destination. So if you know your pilot, and you know where you're going, and you know some of the people on your aircraft with whom you're traveling, provide for them the necessary instructions and benefit so that they can reach the same destination to which you're traveling. And it's not that hard, and it starts with prayer. So we're going to sing this song, Jesus, Savior, Pilot Me. Kind of like that last slide. I don't know that I've ever led this song in this church. I don't know that any of you have ever sang this song before. Hopefully there's a few old school folks that do know that song, but we're going to sing this song. And I'll just make another aside. In the traditional churches of Christ, we call this the invitation song. And I remember growing up as a teenager, it was an invitation for people to come forward, wanting to be baptized or confessing sin or wanting to be a member of the church locally or whatever. It was a time for people to stand up and come down, and then the preacher would talk to them and deal with whatever the issue was. And I'm not saying that this is really an invitation song, except that it's an invitation for you to do some personal evaluation, to do a checkup, as Paul Harvey would say, from the neck up, and see where you are in your relationship with Jesus. And this song really asks you some kind of pertinent questions about your relationship with the pilot, and that's why I think it would be appropriate to sing. So we're going to sing this song. At the conclusion of that song, if you have prayer requests that you want us to pray over, just pass them up during this time, and then we'll pray, and then we'll be dismissed. Let's stand.